call this meeting to order. Thursday, May 26th, 7:30 a.m., the Land Use Committee. First item on the agenda is a presentation on code abatement for derelict buildings by Mr. Price, and thank you very much.
I don't know if all of you have met Doug, our code enforcement officer. I think he's about to have his 1-year anniversary.
In 1 week. So still on probation. So.
It's probably a good thing.
His final exam.
Well, and two, for those who don't know me, I'm really happy to talk on this topic. This has been my specialty for a number of years. It's been one of my main responsibilities in my previous jurisdiction was dangerous building abatement, and in a sense I wrote the book on it, but created a manual to create a complete turnkey process for dangerous buildings there. So, and just to clarify terms real quickly, talking specifically about dangerous building abatement, not nuisance abatement. State laws are a mess as far as abatements, different provisions for different types of nuisances and different types of governments and levels. So talking here specifically dangerous building abatement in second-class cities, because there's different provisions even depending on what type of jurisdiction you are. And then, of course, abatement is talking about both the process and the actual action of correcting whatever's going on. And I always like to clarify, too, that we're not necessarily talking about going out and tearing buildings down. That's one possibility, but the ideal solution in an abatement enforcement case is that the owner does whatever needs to be done, and that may be anything from as little as just securing a building that's being frequented by vagrants up to a demolition. So there are pretty much 3 primary ways of doing dangerous building abatements in the area. There's the Uniform Code for the Abatement of Dangerous Buildings, which is what we have. We've adopted that. There's a process under RCW 3580 where the state very specifically spells out not the way you have to do dangerous building abatements, but one way to do them. And then there's the International Property Maintenance Code.
Have we adopted those second two?
No. The only thing we have is the Uniform Code for the Abatement of Dangerous Buildings. And there's some goods and bads with that code. If we were a county or a first-class city, we could probably use it just fine because of the different state provisions, but it poses some problems for us here for our class of city. And then the International Property Maintenance Code tries to merge all of the nuisance and dangerous building abatement procedures together, but again, that runs into problems with the state law. So just briefly, so actually, let's go to, you have a memo and then you have a page that's a comparison of the different processes, and so I'd like to just dive into that really quickly.
So what the left is what we have.
The left is what we currently have, and it works. We can use it. One of the problems with model codes is that when you adopt them, you're supposed to make whatever changes to them to fit your jurisdiction, fill in some blanks and so on, and that's one thing we haven't done, so we just have it as it's written.
The RCW.
The UCADB.
Oh, so we adopted it with holes in it?
Yeah, we just adopted the model code and we didn't do the customizing in the adopting ordinance and a lot of jurisdictions.
Of where does it fit?
I think, for instance, it usually says that who is responsible for this, and there's a blank, and you're supposed to, in your adopting ordinance, say that wherever it says director, it is the such and such person. And so there's a lot of blanks that get inserted to figure out who's doing what.
And it'll have an appeals commission, and if you have a hearings examiner process instead of an appeals board, then you need to make those kind of changes to reflect,
Or administrative
it's
stuff.
it's not the heart of it for the most part. It's just just details.
And that was back
Kind
in '97 we did that.
I don't actually know when we adopted it.
Yeah, the code is the 1997 code, but
Yes.
that's the year it was published, not the year that we adopted it.
Yeah.
So we adopted sometime after that.
Right, and that is this document. So it's basically been replaced by the International Property Maintenance Code, but a lot of jurisdictions still use this. So the real rundown really quickly process is somehow there's an order issued. There's an opportunity to appeal that. If the owner doesn't appeal and doesn't comply, then there's some process where the city can gain the authority to go onto the property and take care of what needs to be done. And there's some provision for trying to recover the costs. So in the UCADB process, we issue the order. It has the deadlines. It has all of the appeal provisions and everything in the order. They have an opportunity to appeal, generally 30 days. If they don't appeal, then, or if it's imminently dangerous, that's reduced to 10 days. It's appealable to the appeals board. There again, if we wanted to make that be a hearing examiner, we need to make that adjustment.
But we have an appeals board.
On paper, is my,
Yeah, I don't think we've designated who would actually hear the appeal.
right.
So it defaults to council?
Not
We've got a
necessarily.
building.
Wait, yeah, my
We have a
understanding
building
is we
board of
have,
appeals, but that's separate.
That's not,
Yeah.
Yeah.
there wouldn't be this,
We would need to insert building board of appeals here in the ordinance if we wanted that to be the case.
that would be the
and my
problem.
understanding is that board has never actually met, and I mean, it basically exists on paper, but there are no procedures, and so we don't really know how we would do an appeal under that board.
And I don't know if we want to dwell on this or maybe circle back to it, but there's advantages to having the hearing examiner be that appeals person versus.
a lay.
Right.
Yeah.
One of the concerns with the UCADB, and different attorneys will give you different opinions on it, and so it would definitely be something we'd want to see our attorney's opinion on, but is due process. One of the opinions is that if you charge if you charge $400 or whatever for an appeal to your hearing examiner, then you're denying due process, because you're basically saying the way for you to keep us from tearing down your building, you got to put up hundreds of dollars even just to defend your rights. And so it may be that there needs to be an informal or some other level of appeal before that step to give people some options, but that's a question for the attorney.
Yeah, and I think it was Carol Morris's opinion, at least, and she wrote this into our fee resolution, that courts have said that $500 is too much for an appeal, and so we set ours at less than $500, but it's still a gray area in terms of
Right.
case law as to whether any fee at all is inappropriate, or whether it was just a fee of $500 for a hearing examiner was inappropriate. And so if we're going to go to the hearing examiner, the city council would need to appropriate the money to handle any appeals that come forward, and that's an expenditure rather than something that's recoverable.
Right. And so in Lakewood, in the last year I was there, the attorneys decided that this was a problem, and even for a $425 appeal fee. And so either the city was going to not charge for those appeals and the city would eat the cost, or go to an appeal before the building official. That is an informal process with no fee, and then you could have another appeal beyond that.
It's problematic if the person that's creating the enforcement action, though, is the appeal
Appellant,
body.
yeah.
Are you getting an objective?
There is some question about that, and I'll get to that in a minute. So then the UCADB basically says, if there's no appeal and no compliance, the building official can take legal means necessary to abate the condition. It doesn't say what those means are. Basically, some jurisdictions take that to mean, okay, no appeal, no compliance, we can just go do it. really you need to go to Superior Court at that point and get a warrant of abatement. You need to go through a legal process. So it just kind of goes back to court rules and common law versus spelling out in the code what you have to do. Yeah, the building official may institute any appropriate action to abate such building as a public nuisance. After completing the abatement under this process, then it comes to council to review the building official's report of the costs and to determine whether or not a lien is going to be filed for any or all of those costs to recover the money. Then in the UCADB, it provides for the cost to be a special assessment against the property with equal priority with taxes and to be collected as taxes. The problem there is that even though the state doesn't say that you have to use the state's process, the Supreme Court has ruled that you cannot assign any lien or assessment with the priority of taxes unless the state specifically grants you that authority. And that's where there's problems in the state law. That authority is specifically granted to counties and to first-class cities, and I think kind of here and there to other folks, but they've never actually added that language to second-class cities or optional municipal code cities. So even though it's in this code, essentially any money we spend under this code, the best we can do to try and recoup it would be to file essentially a mechanics lien against the property, which good luck on seeing any of that money again. And that gets into one of the...
Why is that?
Because you could put that lien on a property, and then the city could take action to foreclose on that property if they wanted to. But otherwise, it won't get collected with taxes. It'll just be there with no priority over taxes or other liens. Typically, when you have a property that gets to the point where we're doing abatement, there's usually going to be unpaid taxes. They're getting into trouble. If they go into foreclosure, you're not likely to ever get any of your lien back. If it goes to tax foreclosure, all other liens are extinguished at the time of tax foreclosure, according to the state law and the Supreme Court ruling. So even if there was enough money, if the county sold it for taxes and there was enough money gained, the city still wouldn't get it because the city's lien would be extinguished at the time of foreclosure. So with that type of lien, about the only way you're going to get it back is either somebody actually just steps up and pays it, or the city actually goes through the action to foreclose on the property.
So I have a question, if I can interject. It sounds like getting second-class cities the authority to put a tax equivalent lien on a property through abatement may be something for our lobbyists. I don't know if we would want to add that to our legislative agenda.
And it's something I would absolutely like to see happen in general, because it would not only cover us for dangerous building abatements, it would
Could you email me the language you would like
Sure.
forward or put on the lobbyists?
You bet.
agenda?
Because that would help us with nuisance abatements also. The only problem is that other jurisdictions have been trying to get that to happen in a broad sense to where it's applied to everybody. They almost got it up for a vote last year. The Association of Realtors, I think it was, or banks, something like one of those two, fought against it. They made a concession to where it would only apply to the first $2,000 of a lien, and then it never passed. So, so there have been efforts to get that. I still would like to see us push for that, but so far there hasn't been support at the state, even for $2,000 worth of that. So the way around that is to drop the UCADB and go to the RCW 3580, which that's what this handbook is about. This is what I did in Lakewood. And you don't just adopt 3580, you write your own local code that meets the parameters of 3580. There it changes to a process where instead of issuing an order, you issue a complaint. There's an automatic hearing held within 10 to 30 days. Whether or not they show up, you hold a hearing. That's the informal. Some cities use a hearing examiner, some use the code enforcement officer, some use the building official. It is questionable of, okay, if it's the hearing is held before the same person who issued the order, that seems pretty sketchy, but apparently that is actually okay at that level of hearing.
If you're issuing the order and Nick's
That would be fine.
the next, there isn't a fee to it, but Nick is the
Right.
one that, holds that hearing.
Yeah.
I think then you've got some separation at least.
Yeah, in my eyes, that's fine. I'm really shocked by the idea of having the same person do it, but apparently that's been upheld.
Well,
doing
but
it
there's
that way.
an appeal mechanism to that as well.
There
so
is.
That's the fail-safe.
And there again, then the way the RCW 3580 is written, that would be appealable to an appeals commission. So there again, we'd have to decide
Right.
where we'd want appeals to go, and we'd have to
Probably
set
the
that
hearing
up.
examiner from there.
Right.
Mhm.
That's then, it's appealable to Superior Court within 30 days. They can petition for an injunction to stop the city from proceeding. Again, it doesn't say what legal process you have to go through from that point to get the authority to go and do an abatement, but again, it needs to be Superior Court. You can take emergency actions as what's called a summary abatement, and that's to go out and maybe board things up, put a fence around a building, close the street, things like that that you can do on an emergency basis without going through these. But you really can't declare the demolition of a building to be an emergency abatement and just go do the whole thing, which some jurisdictions do. So the city can proceed if nobody else does. And just for background, I'd say it's less than half of the cases where the city would actually have to do so. I've lost track of the number of these that I've done in my previous jurisdiction, but it was well under half where we actually had to go and take action. And there's also, in this process, there's nothing that compels us to take action. If we go through the whole process and they don't do anything and we decide we're not going to go and take that level of governmental action and take someone's building away or something like that, we're not obligated to do that.
But if it's dangerous enough and it's a public safety concern,
If it's truly dangerous, you certainly should. There are some situations where it maybe is an okay thing to do that. Sometimes it's not so dangerous that something needs to be torn down, but this thing's going to go into foreclosure and you really want to make sure it doesn't continue to be used the way it's been used. And this process basically enables you to put a flag on the title, to kind of put some flags out there that say, whoever buys this, you need to deal with some things. Because technically a dangerous building, construction without permits, or even if you get permits and you just don't have inspections, technically it's a dangerous building. That doesn't mean it may be perfectly fine, but it never got inspected, so we can't say that it's safe to occupy. So sometimes using this process enables you to just put that big flag out there that says this building doesn't get reoccupied and reused until these things are corrected.
So does that involve some kind of notice to title?
It does. You record the abatement order. And you can't, even though some jurisdictions don't do that, they just record a notice to title on something where there's code violation and they don't go through any other process, you can get in big trouble for doing that. The state law actually says you cannot do that. So if you want to record something to title, you need to have something to back it up. And also, if you want to post a building unsafe, and I've got one right now where there are some problems, but the main problem is that it continues to be, it's a commercial building, it's not set up for residential occupancy, the owner continues to put residential tenants in it, and it's on a well that it's been on for 40 years or whatever, but it's not an approved well. So we don't want anyone occupying that building until those things are fixed and until it's going to be used properly. So I wanted to post that as do not occupy. To do that, I have to go through this process, because when you post an unsafe or do not occupy, you have to back that up with an abatement order under those codes.
That out here on Bay Street
Yeah, two side by side under the same owner.
by a cell tower.
Yep, and various other problems on that same property. So with this process under the RCW 3580, this is where you can then record all of your costs as a special assessment against the property. They show up just as part of the property taxes. They're collected by the county, remitted back to the city with interest. The county keeps the penalties. This interest goes back to the city. And so the RCW 3580 process is not my favorite. It's not as simple as the UC80B, but if we want, so it comes down to a policy question of if we're spending taxpayer money, do we feel, do we want to go after making sure, do it in a way that we can pretty much guarantee we're going to get it back? Or, and I think City of Tacoma goes through about $1 million a year doing abatements. They don't expect to get much back. They just spend the money out of their utility account. And
How do they get it out of their utility account?
they own all their utilities and somehow they pay for abatements out of utilities. I don't know how that works, but that's how they do that. So personally, even though I don't prefer this process, it's important to me that if responsibility for taxpayer money, I think we should be doing whatever we can to get it back. You won't get back every penny, but there's a far higher likelihood of getting the money back through this process.
So the current process we have, if we stuck with it, we would want to engage the lobbyist to make some corrections to it.
We would need a change to state law for it to.
But we could not go through that process and do something we control, which is not as streamlined process, if I
Right.
understand, for you to deal with, but it gives us an additional mechanism to recover our funds after we go through an
Yes.
action.
Yes.
Is that-
Although engaging the lobbyist, it sounds like, could also help with nuisances,
Yes.
which are a separate type of enforcement, and so we could potentially recover costs of abating nuisances.
I would still like to see us do that, but I think that's a process that probably is not likely to happen quickly, if at all. So,
Maybe what we do is we adopt this other code while we're working with the legislator. If that ever gets changed, we could change the policy.
could go back if we wanted to, or we just, once we get used to doing it under a new process, it'll you get used to it. It's that's the way I was doing it my last year in Lakewood.
I would think it's paramount that we have the ability to recoup some of these funds, because we're never going to have enough money to really make a difference. And so this is going to stretch whatever dollars we have. If it's $60,000 this year in the budget, then if we get to the point where we have to foreclose on something and sell it, then we'd be able to recoup those fees. So I think
Right.
that's
How much of our 60 have we spent?
Well, we have 30, I believe. That's
Yeah,
my
30.
we have 30. I have
I thought I had
one. Yeah, I have one abatement that I'm trying to actually go all the way with, and I can't.
Is that the one up in Forest Park?
Yeah, and I can't tell you if we'll be able to do it for 30. It's going to be close. It's a monstrosity. It's an enormous building. It's on an unstable slope, so there's issues with stabilization. It's 1398 Canyon Lane,
Yeah.
so it's on page
It's
2.
built
That's
without
been
permits.
sitting there for 32 years.
With
Yeah.
it was built, yeah, and it's,
In 2007, they took the back 13 feet off of it because when it was first built, during the construction, they extended out the foundation and added another 13 feet. And by the 2000s, that was about like so, because it was right on the top of an unstable slope. And so they took 13 feet back off of it and just put OSB on the back wall. But the rest of it has sat pretty much untouched since 1983. Yeah, there was some engineering a couple of years ago that
It's
said,
all gone.
it's gone through, the original owner died, it's gone through a couple of other owners. The most recent owner hasn't done a thing since he bought it, hasn't paid the taxes, I think. Or he's a year delinquent on the taxes.
So if we went through this foreclosure action and paid the we'd have to pay the taxes then to get the property. Otherwise, the county gets the property.
That's a good point.
I know.
Yeah.
I know in a bank foreclosure,
Right.
you got to pay all liens ahead of you
Right.
if you're going to obtain the property. Otherwise, you let the county have it.
And that's one of the.
You got to weigh what's in front of you
Mhm.
versus the value of what you're going to get.
You might be able to pledge a note to the county though, that funds at closing.
Right?
Yeah, I think in
You gotta
this
pay it.
case,
You get
yeah,
clear title.
yeah, in this case, if we were, I don't think you're going to get the value out of this property anyway. I think the property is going to be virtually unbuildable.
Yeah, it is.
It's in a green belt, you can have a single-family dwelling, but at this point, you need a 40-foot setback from the slope, and your setback from the street, there's nothing left. Unless you can get an engineer's report showing a way that you can build it safely, which there is an engineering report on this one that says, yes, you could save this by, because the current foundation is settled another 3 inches. So if you put in 40-some tin pilings around it and attach them to the foundation and jack it back up, and the pilings going down 21 feet to bedrock, then you could theoretically save this house. Yeah.
So you got these two comparisons. What about the International Property Code?
The IPMC, I really didn't include it. It would need extensive reworking to make it work anyway. And we'd have the same problems we have currently with the UCADB. It still wouldn't comply with RCW 3580. So I would like to eventually possibly pick up the IPMC for the nuisance part, but it really won't help us here. It just really would be the same boat that we're already in. So
Is that what Bremerton adopted a few years back, was the International Property Maintenance Code, where they were?
don't know what they.
Remember that?
I remember looking at it, but I don't
They had
remember
a
which
couple
one they adopted.
structures over by the Manette Bridge that had
Yeah.
been of concern for many years.
So do we have a recommendation, your experience and maybe what
My-
the attorney has to say where we could make
My-
some progress here?
Yeah, my recommendation is, like I say, even though I don't like it as much, my recommendation is to go to the process that complies with 3580. I've already done a lot of the work to create that. Right after I started here, I did some of the drafting of that. It'll take some time yet to draft all of the details. The code isn't that big of a problem, but what I have here that I created in Lakewood is everything. This has all of the finance department procedures and forms, the procedures for bidding it and contracting it, and everything in just a turnkey thing. And I would want to create that here.
So what do you need? 60 days, 90 days?
I think, given current workload, 90 days.
Well, and I think the other challenge is going to be getting the attorney review, and right now the
Yes.
attorney seems to be, has plenty on her plate, so.
Well, the code enforcement attorney seems to be a little more available. I think she.
Oh, is
would-
Sharon doing this?
It's Pat.
Or Patricia?
Patricia is the code enforcement attorney.
Gotcha.
Patricia Teraday. So getting the code ready wouldn't take all that long. I guess really getting.
Well, I mean, I'd prefer, you guys have some expertise with this.
Yeah.
I'd prefer to pay you in your time to do
Start it.
the most of it,
Right.
and the framework, then
Review
send it to
and
the
edit.
attorney.
And that's
for
basically.
her to have her tweak it,
Yeah.
review it, and then bring it forward.
Yeah, that's basically where I am. I've got the code just about ready to go.
Would it be,
for review?
Would it be advantageous to, if you're looking at a model similar to that, having her look at that model first so that you're not doing some unnecessary work if she finds something?
Yeah. And the other thing I would like to do as part of that is to work, spend a little bit of time with Mike Barth, our contract building inspector, given his background as building official, and just just for a few tweaks that I think should be made that are a little over my head in here, just in some of the code language.
In your experience, when the city goes into abate these problems, is there a norm? Is it normally just tear the thing down?
No, I've done a lot of demolitions, and previously I did the whole thing. I pretty much did all the accounting, I did the contracting, the bidding, the start to finish, the whole works. Did a fair number, I've done a few dozen demolitions, but
I mean,
that's probably, of the ones where the city has to really go in and do something, that's probably the most common. You have the option of going in and repairing, or stabilizing, or tearing down. A lot of times you don't want to go in and be trying to repair something that's just not worth it, or, you know, that gets a
So
little
how often,
screwy.
on a percentage basis, how often do you go in and start an action and the property owner deals with it versus us having to continue that process?
At least half the time, the owner takes care of it. More than half, I think.
How many of these, I mean, you've got a lot of
Yeah. So
pretty
here's
scary buildings.
right.
here.
So I've got this
How many, do you
list.
think half of these will be dealt with for the property, or do you think these are all far enough gone that?
So there's about 31 on this list, and just going down and looking at the ones where I think we would end up having to do a demolition. One, two, three. I'd say maybe 6 to 10 of these we would actually have out of 30. Yeah, probably less than that. And some of them, like this 1190 Bay, there are a couple of issues there, but as far as the structure, it's a carport. And so, and the 1461 bill there again, the house just needs to be secured. Otherwise, it's a shed and a carport that need to be torn down. So some of these are minor. You know,
That was going to be my next question. You mentioned we've got 30,000 based on your experience in this list that we have before us.
Right.
What do you think is a reasonable number on an annual basis to budget for this kind of action?
well, and that's the other, that gets into one of the policy questions, is how would you want to fund this? And you could do the annual funding or case-by-case funding. 30,000 generally, as far as a full demolitions, would get me 1 to 2 demolitions out of that. It just depending. This one is pretty extreme. This one is really big, really expensive. Average cost is closer to about 15,000. What we did in Lakewood was they did a lump sum of $250,000 and formed a revolving fund. And I continued to work out of that for a number of years. We ended up coming up with another couple $100,000 through a federal stimulus grant.
Has the city of Port Orchard ever demoed a building in the last 30 years?
I think Kathy's
Yeah,
done one or two.
she did 1 or 2,
Well, yeah.
Okay.
and had the owners do 1 or 2, I think.
Okay.
So, you know,
We
that's,
actually went in one particular case and took over the property, refurbished it, turned around and sold it down on Main Street.
Right.
I think ideally if we were looking at starting, just setting up a fund right off the bat, I would say 150,000 might be a good starting point, 150 to 200,000
As a revolving fund?
as a revolving fund. And some of those you'll never recover. There are times that if it forecloses, if it goes for tax sale, they can't even get enough. Especially like this one, it's a good chance that it would all go on the taxes, it would all be unpaid, the county would foreclose, then the county would put the property up for sale. Well, if there's 40,000 in abatements plus 20,000 in taxes, the property isn't even worth that much, and nobody's going to pay that much. So,
Is there ever an opportunity that you could find out how close it is to a county action and just hold off on the date?
I always look at that. I always, when I start a case like this, one of the first things I do is I look at bank foreclosures. What's the status of the mortgages?
If we
what's
did
the-
that, could you put some kind of a notice on the sale that the county does that says, buyers beware?
Well, that's where the abatement order gets recorded, and that goes against the title. One of the things we did in Lakewood was, in a handful of cases, the county did foreclose, the properties weren't worth enough to sell to cover the costs. We were working with Habitat for Humanity on a big emphasis project in Lakewood. The county would, in several cases, surplus the properties, gave them to us or sold them to the city for $1 or whatever, and then we turned around and handed them off to Habitat for Humanity as our contractor, in a sense, to build new housing. So there's some options. One of the other things too with recovering costs, a lot of times, actually more often than not, they don't end up going to tax foreclosure. What happens is the banks look at that lien, and the banks actually step up once they're in foreclosure and pay off that lien directly to the city and clear it. So,
Depends.
yeah.
On what's there, what's gonna cost it to
Well, as soon
demo
as the
it.
city went in and demolished, the value was cut down significantly, so.
Mhm.
Yeah, my opinion, I think we wanna set up this revolving fund. I'd like to see us, it'd be tough to swallow putting 200 or 250,000, but have a goal to get to a revolving fund of X.
Right.
And we fund 50 grand a year, every year until we get to that.
Oh, yeah.
And that's just a commitment we're gonna, and as money comes back into it, maybe we'll get to a point where we don't have to fund 50 grand, or we're putting 20 or 30,000.
Well, that's exactly right, and because we've not really done too much, we've got a huge list.
Yeah.
You know, if we were to take care of a lot of this list, then on a move forward basis, you might be dealing with
Well,
3 or
and-
4 a year, not
Yeah.
31.
Yeah. And if we can get to where we've got the ability to recover it, we're tackling a couple of these a year, and maybe half the time we get our money back to help with this revolving fund. You look at this one on page 4, Morton Street. I've been inside this house when it was on the market. It looks fine from the street. It's scary inside.
Right.
The whole substructure is falling within, and you can touch the walls, and they.
Well, from an optics standpoint, if there's people out there that know that we've got dilapidated buildings that have 32 years that we've done nothing,
Yeah.
then it's not real motivating to them to
Right.
get
Well,
right on
why-
it. Whereas
why
if
should
they're
I
seen
be-
as we have a process and we're
Yeah.
acting with due diligence or diligently, then
And it
try
drags.
motivate them to fix it
Yeah.
sooner than later.
It drags the neighborhood down, and so that, and looking at just the reasons for doing abatements and the reasons why we need to do them, of course, we have old deteriorated building stock. We have negligent landlords, we have unstable slopes. I've got one that I started, and after I started it, realized it was just one parcel outside the city, but it was a case where the land was failing, and so the house was cracking, and so there it was because of the movement of the ground. The economy and all kinds of unpermitted remodels. I saw a wave of this. We had all the home improvement shows. Do it yourself and go in and rehab. They never tell you need permits. They never tell you need engineering. And I literally had to tear a couple buildings down that should have been perfectly fine, but because someone went in there to rehab, didn't know what they were doing, started ripping out supporting walls and all of this stuff, and made the house just a wreck. So then the benefits and the way that I use this process, number one, it's public safety and tenant safety. It's crime prevention, nuisance removal. So on the neighborhood revitalization and the crime prevention side, I'm trying right now to focus on one particular neighborhood up the hill where the whole neighborhood is kind of depressed, and there are a number of houses that are in really bad condition there, and I'm trying to hit kind of that whole area, hit multiple places, and in doing that I can impact the entire neighborhood.
Well, and I see some easy marks here too, in these
Yes.
carports and
Right.
things too that are just visual nuisances, and they shouldn't be that difficult for the property owners to deal with them.
Right.
So, I guess moving forward, I mean,
Well, I
we're
think-
all in agreement that we would like to move towards this RCW structure and cut staff loose to begin the process of drafting that code and maybe setting a goal that 90 days from now that this committee could maybe review it again before we
before it heads to full council.
Do you want to have this full discussion at work study before you have him work on the code, or do you want to have him get started on the
I
code?
think at our next council meeting, Scott could give a committee report that this is the direction we've given staff. Does anybody have any heartburn with
Yeah,
it?
would you like to move it on to?
He's developed, we're talking about a revolving fund and modifying our code to allow us to have this revolving fund. Other than that, the code's really not much different. It's the mechanics of it that are slightly different. We're not talking about nuisance buildings here. We're talking about dangerous buildings.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're right, it's the mechanics, and then for me, it's the policy questions, and this is one of the things I'm looking for from the council, and I think I'm getting it pretty strongly, but, one of the things was the whole idea of foreclosure. Some jurisdictions aren't even comfortable going there and ending up with the possibility someone might end up losing their property because we've had to go in and take their building down or whatever. And so, it doesn't sound like there's heartburn over that.
If not, if we put $30,000 or $50,000 into the property and they refuse to do it.
Right. And one of the others is owner occupied, and this is one of the most difficult ones. And you see a couple of, in these pictures, it's very hard to really see what's going on in just the simple one or two shots. But for example, you've got 510 Sroof on page 7. It's owner occupied, a hoarder, other life problems. The place is in very bad shape, doesn't have properly functioning utilities. That's one of the decisions we have to make is, do we just let somebody continue to live in their castle in those conditions, or do we say this is not acceptable? Yeah, that's one that's really hard to
right
wrestle
here,
with.
right?
Yeah, they're right up the hill.
They've actually have made some progress on this.
A little.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a couple
On this
and
one?
Yeah, I go by it every now and then when I'm running around.
there's another one similar down the street from it, and it's just an example of that's one of the questions that that I would be looking for somewhere along the line is how aggressive do we want to be with
Well, I think we've got,
these kind of situations?
early on, we've got plenty of
Oh, yes.
projects.
Right. Yes.
To get before that one where
Right.
they're
Right.
half fallen down.
This
and-
one is actually across the street from my house, and
This-
I've not seen any
Oh,
progress.
this one?
The 510 Truth, owner occupied.
Oh, okay.
So
Is this
and-
where they've just done some clearing then around it?
Periodically, she goes out and mows the grass.
And then I guess the one other thing is just where does the council fit in? Because in the UCADB process, the council is involved. It's after the fact, but the council is involved. In the RCW 3580 process, the council isn't really involved unless you want to be, in some cases, some jurisdictions might have to go to the council for approval before they do an abatement. Or even just as an advisory to the council. And so kind of the questions of do we want to use a hearing examiner as our appeal process, and where does the council fit in, if at all? So those are some of those kind of details that I
Well, I
need
think we can look
guidance
for
on.
recommendations there, because at the end of the day, the council, our role is with policy.
Mhm.
So if then the process that you all determine is the best way to do it.
Maybe on an annual basis, you're coming to this committee and giving a report.
Right.
Yeah.
Here's the property,
We don't need to get in the weeds on it.
here's the
Yeah.
list of properties, here's what we accomplished last year, here's the 4 properties or 3 properties we're gonna move forward on this year.
And here's the revolving fund, and this is how many liens we have
Yeah.
out and
How
what
we
our
need to
balance is.
refill the fund, which
This-
is
this- this at this
go to the
level.
finance committee and budgeting and.
And that's what I think.
I'm a little uncomfortable with making those kind of decisions, to be honest with you. We're 3 of 7, we're not the majority. And I
No, I'm
think
saying, I would like the
if you were-
recommendations from them with this.
Exactly, if
It's
you were
like
to
how-
put a list together of these are the policy decisions that the council needs to make, here's your options.
Right.
At least we can vet it through the entire body and not just their
Yeah.
heads.
Yeah. I was more seeing it as here's a progress report.
I don't mind the process that you suggested personally,
Yeah.
but I do mind three of us
Okay,
picking
so
out
maybe
and
it's
making
one,
a
maybe it's one,
decision.
yeah, I'm not asking you guys to make a decision.
Develop recommendations to bring
Yeah.
back.
Make
Absolutely.
recommendations and we bring it back to the council.
Yep.
As opposed to, you know, a 30-second committee report that's the rest of the council considers very more.
Thank you.
Good to know how to proceed.
Thank you very much.
Great.
All
Good
right,
job,
thank you,
thank
Doug.
you.
Good work.
All right, parking on Blackstone Court.
Suppose that's why I'm up here.
Yeah.
So do we have a flyer or something, so you're aware what Blackstone Court comprises?
I don't.
Having a clue.
I don't think so.
This was in everyone's packet.
May I borrow yours for a moment?
Yes, in fact, I have one more extra. Anyone else needs it?
Yeah, we'll share one.
I'll share with John.
Would you like- So do you want to
Yeah,
details?
We hear this,
Passes.
do we hear this at
Yeah.
land use about 2 months ago? Is this the same development that came in? Was it land use committee or they approached the whole council?
There's a number of these developments that kind of a development practice we had. We
The
kind
one we
of,
talked about HOA
Was
related.
behind Elvison's on.
That was Highlands and Carter.
Yes.
Yeah,
That would be a
okay,
different
okay,
one.
okay.
we've
This
kind of
is
stepped
Eagle
away from
Crest.
these style of developments, haven't we, Nick? Or we're not recommending them because they lack.
This is up off of Melcher, or Melcher and Pottery.
The Eagle Crest development,
Yeah.
down there.
It drops
past
down the
health-
hill.
Group health building. Go past
Okay,
North
I know what you're
Potteries.
talking
It's probably a 10-year-old, 15-year-old development.
Got a little play area as you go in and before you take a left.
You make a left at the 90 there, and it drops down to Eagle Crest. I've been here a long time, like Mr. Clausen has, and over the years, I've watched some of these developments kind of get short-suited when they allow some of these narrow roads, one-way roads, one sidewalk, no sidewalks. You're very familiar with some of these, and sometimes it brings up issues farther down the road, and this is one of them. But I've been out there and I've looked at her complaint, the gal that complained here. She lives at the dead end of Blackstone in the cul-de-sac. All the roads in the development are basically the same width. So her road on Blackstone is no different than Landover or any of the other streets that are down there. They're about 22 feet wide approximately. Her complaint is she doesn't believe if somebody's parking on the shoulder that they get a fire down the road to her residence or any other residence, and I'll be honest with you, it's not true. I was out there. I looked at Blackstone when there was actually a car parked in in front of the houses there, and you could still easily get a fire truck through. And that's the same for any of the developments out there. And now if you park maybe two beside each other, one across the street, then it might cause an issue, but then we'll deal with it when it comes up. The only
Do
time
they allow parking on both sides of the street?
there's no parking signs at all. So literally, you could park there if you wanted to, but I can tell you, all the years I've been here since they've started the development, I can't think of one time where we've actually had to go out there and impound a car or ticket it to get it moved. I wish she could have maybe provided some photographs, but I think her concern is just some of the neighbors along there are just parking on one side of the road, the sidewalk side, and she doesn't believe that you can get a fire engine through there in emergency, and that's not true. You can't. I've driven out there. In fact, I drove out there again last night just to double check to make sure there's enough room out there. It's never been an issue. I can tell you this, if there's a fire down at a dead end there, and there is a car blocking them, they can't get a fire truck through, they're gonna get a fire truck through.
Right.
They'll just push the car out of the road if they have to, that in an emergency. But I just don't see an issue out there. And you
Well,
know,
typically then, if there isn't a public safety issue, then it's what we've done in the past is it's a neighborhood issue. If you guys want to circulate a petition and the majority of your neighbors want to put them up, so be it, by not responding to one person's complaints.
yeah, all the roads are the same out there. So, I mean, reality is if you want to put no parking on one side of the road, you'd probably have to do it through the entire development up there because the roads are all the same. In fact, when I was up there last night, somebody had parked a travel trailer on Landover on the sidewalk side, which is it's a considerable size piece of equipment, and you can still get a fire truck through there. So I just don't see an issue. Mark asked me to come up here and point that out to you.
It's great that you continue to check on it. Thank you.
Well, we do. It initially came to us as a parking complaint, and then we deal with every single complaint as they arise. And I sent my sergeant out there that night. Parking enforcement went out there to take a look, and there were no violations. And I mean, the individuals at the parking's limited out there anyways, like in any type of development. Sure. If you have 3 cars, you put 2 in the driveway, and your third one's going to have to go somewhere. So this guy had parked his white Mustang out in front of his house, and there's no issues with it. I mean, you can get by his car easily.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Short and sweet, so.
Any other questions?
So do we, should we respond and just say?
We've already responded.
You've already responded.
I sent a sergeant out there to address it one-on-one. That's what we do, so we just don't write him a letter and say sorry, But we took that as far as we could, and then apparently Mark said she generated another letter.
A public works complaint.
Right, she wanted to take it to the next level because she wasn't satisfied with the police response. And
Well, then I think the letter should cite the fact that law enforcement has looked at it, met with you. It's now been elevated to a committee that we reviewed it and agreed with law enforcement.
I hate to fix something that's not broken.
Right.
So, and again, if somebody has a huge party up there and you got 30 people showing up and they're parking everywhere, then we'll address that as the issue arises.
Okay. Great.
Okay.
So we'll get a letter from the Public Works Department out.
I guess our final option would be take it to full council. Our recommendation is going to be it's not an issue.
Yeah, I would move it up. I wouldn't recommend to move it up at this point.
Well, I would recommend moving it up, but I think we need to tell her our options.
And if she's going to come back, maybe come back with something that's more solid, some pictures or some proof that.
Absolutely.
And John's idea of, hey, your
Get your
petition,
neighbors to concur.
Petition the
Throw
neighbors.
some options.
Yeah, if you got more than half the neighborhood saying we've got a problem here and we want signs and we don't want parking on the street. More than half the neighbors says we don't want to have parking on the street. That's a different story.
Well, that's maybe what we should share. As far as public safety, we don't see a problem, but if you and your neighbors want to change the parking, circulate a petition, bring it forward, we'll look at parking restrictions.
I'm not sure that's going to happen up there because the neighbors want to park along that.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
right.
I don't either, but at least we're
We're giving that
giving that
option.
option. So.
Right.
And I'm not sure there's a person in the audience. Are you here for this issue?
Did you want to speak to this?
No, absolutely.
I'm on the board of the homeowners association,
Okay.
and it is a problem. You may not see it, you may come out and you not see it, but numerous times there are people that are parking opposite each other all the time. You can run your...
That was what I'm saying. If you park them side by side, it might
You
be
can
a
run your
problem.
people out there and look at it anytime, but numerous times are there, and all we're asking is that you put it on one side of the deal. The side that does not have the sidewalk, just put no parking throughout the whole area, just that side. So they park on one side of the road only. That's all we're asking.
I think it would be helpful if we got a petition from the neighborhood that came from the homeowners associations that showed that more than half of the community out there wants this versus one person writing us and saying that. I think that carries more weight. So
That can be done.
Perfect.
that would be ideal.
That'd be great.
Yeah, that'd be very helpful.
I think it would also be good, we need to understand what the road widths are out there and what the actual what is the dimension that we're dealing with? Is it just an issue where 2 cars can't pass when there's 2 cars parked there, or is it an issue where there's not sufficient room for a fire truck to go through and that one car might have to back out?
If you park 2 cars opposite each other, a fire truck would have to push one car out of the way.
That was my point. The only time it would be a problem is if you literally parked cars across from each other. then you're encroaching probably in the center lane. But again, an emergency, again, I know what the firemen do, and they're gonna get it back there one way or the other. But, I personally I've not seen that out there.
Oh, I have.
Yeah, well, there's no doubt people do that every once in a while. I mean, I'm not gonna say it
In
never
that
happens,
letter,
but.
you want to address the fact that
Yeah.
the board member from the HOA was here and we talked about this petition type
But
concept.
again, if
and
somebody
get
called
testimony.
911 regarding a parking complaint immediately when it occurred, we would send somebody out, we would ticket the car. And if it was blocking the roadway where we couldn't get an emergency vehicle through and we couldn't get a hold of the owner of the car, we would call for an impound and impound the vehicle because it's blocking the roadway. We've done that before, not in your neighborhood, but we've done that.
The problem we have too is that they'll park on the sidewalk.
And that's
pull up
illegal.
on the sidewalk.
That's a ticket, that's an
And
infraction,
because they know that there's not enough room,
Right.
so they'll pull up on the sidewalk, which is.
right? Now, again, a homeowner or somebody that would have to call for us to come up there and take care of that. That's generally not an area where our parking enforcement constantly goes up there and patrols for parking violations. They'll pop in there once in a while, but if somebody calls because you're blocking a driveway or they're parked on the sidewalk, we will go up and deal with it immediately.
That's what Carrie's doing.
The other thing the board wanted to know is can they put their own no parking sign?
They're not enforceable.
They're not enforceable.
They're not enforced.
Correct.
Then we'll go back to the other.
And again, if you decide somewhere down the road that you want to do this with Blackstone, it would probably affect the entire neighborhood because the streets are all the same design up there.
Yeah, it's all
You've
the
got
same.
one sidewalk on one side, no sidewalk on the other side. The streets are approximately the same width.
Is that all one homeowners association?
Yes,
Okay.
there's 82 homes.
Wow.
I think the easiest way to address it now is when you have a violation, call right away, and we will send somebody to deal with it.
Well, I think really the solution is having your homeowners association meeting and have a petition signed. Present that petition to the city, and then we'll be able to take action based on the majority of the group wanting, you know,
That'd be fine.
then wanting a particular action.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming out.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Any other questions? All right. Item number 3, multifamily. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Multifamily property tax exemption code.
Okay, so this ordinance has already been vetted through economic development, and they've asked that it be brought to the full council work study, and I think it's on the agenda for July.
It's on the work study agenda, and I believe finance saw this already, if it had to do with the tax exemption, the property tax. It's not gonna-
Tax abatement.
Yeah, tax abatement, thank you. I was-
So the principle,
You may have.
so this ordinance was developed, it's largely based on what Bremerton adopted, and our attorney has reviewed it and is comfortable moving forward with this. I think the key here is that when we adopt an ordinance and designate the areas where the ordinance applies on a map where we want to see redevelopment of multifamily
Is that the
housing.
map?
We'll get to the map here in a minute, and we're working on digitizing this map. We just haven't completed that yet. The idea is that somebody can apply for tax abatement and they can build a new project but not have their property tax assessment, their assessed valuation change for a period of years. And that number of years can be 8 or 10 depending on whether there's an affordable housing component in the project. And the city also has the ability to designate what is the minimum number of units that have to be constructed in order to qualify for tax abatement under this type of ordinance. And so the idea is that this is a way to help make it easier for somebody to take on a risky multifamily or mixed-use type project and target those projects for certain areas of our city, whether those are in our centers, just in our downtown, or in other areas such as South Kitsap Mall, places where maybe we would like to see some improvement, but the existing use maybe is still, it hasn't declined to the point where it's ready to be
The project
redeveloped,
doesn't
but
pencil.
this can push something over the line as far as making it a viable option. And so what we've done is we've drawn, just the old-fashioned way using markers, We've tried to highlight the areas where the tax abatement could apply, and so we've identified the entire downtown and the Bethel corridor up to a little south or a little north of Lund, and they're the commercial areas and the multifamily zoned areas in the areas that are circled. Up on Mile Hill, there's a couple of properties, whether we include all of those or not. I think the Kmart property is certainly one that maybe is underutilized. I don't know about the movie theater long term, whether that would be a viable property. But the South Kitsap Mall, there's some storage units near the high school, and then I think the Bethel corridor between downtown and Lund really, you have good transit there, and so it's an ideal place if people who, especially if you're including an affordable housing component to the project you'd like to see, it's a good opportunity to give them easy access to transit, to get them downtown to the passenger ferry, to get them to the county, and
Another area we were
Oh, and then-
discussing, we were talking this Forest Park area. It isn't yet on there, but. we
and it
thought-
isn't currently zoned multifamily, but if we rezoned it
It's
multifamily,
multifamily.
you could redevelop some of those areas, and that would be a way maybe to deal with some.
South of the government campus to Tremont, kind of Blackjack Creek to Sydney is what we were.
Just out of curiosity, why are we doing this? I mean, what's the basic premise?
It's one of the tools that we're seeing utilized in Bremerton and in the Proctor District in Tacoma, giving another tool to the development community to make a project pencil. So what we're doing is freezing their property taxes at the current level.
Well, I understand that part of it, but what I'm hearing is when we would grant this property tax exemption if they were to provide affordable housing.
That's a
Or-
component. It gives.
You can give more years for
More
affordable
years.
housing, but it doesn't have to be affordable housing. But right now, if there are areas where you're not seeing redevelopment, this is a tool to encourage that redevelopment.
Then I'm for it.
You get-
Redevelopment, I think it's a great idea. If it's to create more affordable housing, I think we've got our fair share of affordable housing.
You only get 8 years if you do a redevelopment project. If you do affordable housing, you get up to 10 years.
And affordable housing will only
That's
have to be
part of
a
the objective.
small percentage of the project. It doesn't have to be the whole project.
Well,
Years
the way,
ago, I did, and this was the housing authority wanted to put in a big
We're not-
low-income housing
So we're not,
section.
this isn't
Well,
low
I
income.
understand, let me finish. Just outside of the city, and at that point, with the census data we looked, Port Orchard has more affordable housing than any other part of Kitsap County, and that's when it included West Park and Bremerton, that they've now dispersed out throughout the community. So I think we've done our fair share of affordable housing.
I think anything that gets them.
That
built in
part I
Port Orchard-
agree. That
Anything
part I
that gets
agree.
built here is gonna meet the definition.
Well,
I
like-
would rather do 10 years for somebody,
Yeah.
I hate to say this,
It's-
but
it's-
doesn't have affordable.
But if there's an RCW we have to meet. It's not just our code. This is coming from a state
Okay, well,
RCW.
then I can live
well, I
with
like
it.
what they've done here because this focuses the theme of redevelopment. This
And
isn't
we're
like
not
up
in-
on Sydney where they're building already. This is like, these are
Yeah.
areas where we want to promote.
Right. It's
Redevelopment.
happening already.
And we want multifamily along Bethel Avenue, is that the future, Bethel Avenue,
Mixed use, well, we're talking mixed use.
mixed use?
And it doesn't have to be. It could be just giving you the tool to do it for 8 years for a commercial project.
Yeah, and I think you have total discretion.
I understand.
Yeah, you have total discretion depending on what the project is, and you may say that, you know what, this project doesn't make sense from our planning standpoint for long-range growth, and we don't want to encourage this project. So you
So
have the ability
there's
to approve this.
subjectivity to it?
Oh, yeah, you're allowed to approve or deny this. It's not that I don't think you're compelled to
Project
grant this.
by project? we are?
Yeah, I
Okay.
believe so.
So they would meet the zoning requirements, but we still would have the ability to deny it.
Yeah, I mean,
Deny
this,
the abatement, not the
Not the
project.
project, but
Right.
the
right, this
abatement
is a
tool.
council approval, right? Yeah, and I don't think, this is a financial decision on the part of the city council. It's not that they have a right to this, it's that this is a tool that you can offer them.
And I was gone for that work study too. I think it was in March, right?
No, it's coming to the work study. We took it to
Okay.
finance a month ago.
We took it to economic development.
Okay, economic development.
So are there criteria by which the council would deny the abatement?
It's all, I mean, the process is all laid out in here. They have to clear a threat, they have to meet all the criteria to qualify to receive this, but ultimately it's the council's decision on whether or not to approve it.
To grant it.
So I don't think there are approval criteria other than the minimum that they have to meet in order to qualify for this.
So they would come in and justify it by meeting all of the criteria, then at that point it would go to council, get blessed.
Yes.
So the council would be back at approving individual projects at that point.
Well, you're not approving the individual
Not the
project.
but approving the abatement for an individual.
Yeah, you're essentially just knocking down one of the barriers to their approval, but they still have to get their permits approved.
Why in that circumstance would you not want to approve it? Would the
Well,
council not want to?
I think that it really comes down to the map, and depending on how targeted the map is, if there are very specific areas where you want this, if your map is specific, you may want to approve it every time. If your map is general, you may want to wait. If you want to have broader areas, you may want to take things on a more case-by-case basis. You may want to look at what is the current sales tax revenue generation of a particular site versus what is the proposed use and what is the financial impact long-term, not just in property tax, but also in other revenues. So I think it's a financial decision that you have to evaluate.
My idea is that we're redeveloping properties that have little or no benefit to our community. We're getting housing, potentially sales tax revenue, and jobs as the property's redeveloped, where we're not potentially, if Nick brings up a good point, if we've got maybe we need to define this map better and shrink it. We've gotten a little broad, when we were even talking about this area, which we felt needs some help in redevelopment. Many of those derelict building properties are
Well, and if you show that on a map, they would have to actually get a rezone before they're even eligible for tax abatement. Then they'd have to get the tax abatement, and then they would have to apply for the project. So that's, you're saying that you're essentially signaling that, you may want to consider applying for a rezone in this area. Whether that's a good idea or not, I'm not totally sure, but that was suggested by the economic development.
Is there a method that a person could project the sales tax revenue by the type of commercial that they're proposing?
Yes,
well,
you see it it's a projection.
Performa budget.
Their performance, yeah.
Income
We
statement.
ask for them all the time in the bank. They're not usually, they're not.
Accurate.
Yeah, it's a guess.
So you can cut it down by 30%, and then you can be really close.
When it comes to redevelopment, I think it's easier to know what you have and then compare it to what they're projecting.
Well, to me, logically, if you were going to look at something like that, you'd look at the project and say, okay, this project's going to project like so much sales tax, it's going to create so many jobs, so that you can kind of justify in your mind that, yeah, this is something that's going to benefit the city, so let's waive the property tax.
So maybe that's one of our criteria, is a performer is provided on the economic benefit to the community.
I would prefer somebody look at that just so that they, the idea was a net sum gain. We give up the property tax, but we're going to get jobs and sales tax.
Well, and we're not giving up anything that we don't already have. We're not getting the gain for a period of time. They're still going to pay their
They're going to
current.
pay the basic property, they're just not going to pay.
They're going to, they're paying it on $1 million right now on this site,
Guys.
and they're going to invest $7 million. They don't pay property taxes on that $7 million for a period of time. We're still going to get the property taxes on that first $1 million that's already there.
So we're not out anything.
And
You're
it's
only out the
our
additional
portion.
services.
And it's only you're right, and it's only our portion. We can't give away the county's, the
Right.
school district's portions.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
The
really-
city loses nothing, but we are gaining jobs, we are gaining.
Potentially sales tax
I think
revenue.
it's a great
So
idea
there's-
that I just
Yeah.
have a heartburn over creating more affordable housing, but
Yeah, I think the only thing you're potentially losing is that if you do a project that adds 500 people and you need to hire an additional cop or, buy additional equipment because you suddenly have a demand for services. But it's really just a 10-year lag time, and usually, we've observed annexations before without any
Absolutely,
staff.
I think you gotta look at the long-term
Yeah.
benefit personally.
And so the arguments, the critics of this have been saying, you're laying the tax burden on me, for this redevelopment, and we're not. We're not giving up anything that we don't already have.
Except for what
Nick
Nick
just
was
put
just
it.
saying, if we have to hire more staff,
Yeah,
the others are gonna be paying for that staff while we wait for that.
We have the ability to shut this off at any time too.
true. And we also have the ability to demonstrate that we are going to get other revenue sources, sales tax,
Building permit
building
revenue,
permit
utility
revenue.
tax.
Those are things that will all
Yeah.
should offset the need for services.
Well, and I just think you need more jobs and more
This is just,
commercial years.
I've met with a handful of developers, and they've all pointed to this is why they're doing projects in other communities. This is another tool you need to have in the toolbox here.
It's great.
Yeah, and the examples, I think, in Tacoma, they've done a couple of multifamily projects at Tacoma Mall that are on the northwest side of the mall. And then they've done the Proctor Station project, which is the brand new mixed-use development in 26th and Proctor. It's a really neat project to check out if you're in Tacoma. And then I don't know if Bremerton has used theirs yet.
Yeah,
Okay.
the Spyglass,
Spyglass, okay.
West Larson's project.
Great.
That's their first one, but they have.
So we'll bring this forward. I will look at the criteria for what information they submit, and we'll see if anybody's done anything that says we would like to see a pro forma. Or maybe we just encourage them to submit that with their request so that we can help justify approving their
Yeah.
request. But we'll look at that. And
It'll make it a no-brainer if you can show me the economic benefit to our community.
Okay. You had something on Verizon Small Cell?
Yeah, so I was sitting in a 4.5-hour meeting last night, and they had a presentation from Verizon Wireless. Verizon's approaching the city of Bremerton. They have a new program called Small Cell, and they're doing this in communities throughout Washington already. And basically these small, like downtown Bremerton, for example, they have these very ornate light poles, and they're going in and they have to test the engineering of these poles to make sure that the apparatus they're going to put on them, wouldn't make it fail. If it would make it fail, then Verizon at their expense re-engineers a light pole to the same exact design standards, and then they have half a dozen different type of styling of these small cell towers. They're smaller than 18 inches. Some of them are just tiny. You barely even notice it. And basically what it's doing, it's providing, two things. Just coverage where there hasn't been coverage, number one, and number two, it's taking off of the demand of the large cell, in times of high peak volumes that just, you might look like you have great service, but you can't connect because of, and again, that's probably not happening in Kitsap County like it is in King County. But we certainly, because of our rural feel, we have so many areas of our community where there is no cell reception. Take it to the next level from an emergency response standpoint, when you could have somebody that's in need of assistance dials 911 and then they aren't able to communicate. Right now with the different tower locations, we may be able to ping them and get within 100 feet, but with these small towers, you can get them down within 5 feet.
We've been approached a couple times by companies that they want, actually much like utility company. We lack the ordinance right now for a franchise agreement for this. We would need a franchise agreement because they're wanting to put it throughout the cities and potentially on the utility poles that PSC actually owns.
Right, and so there it is. It depends who owns the asset, right? So in Bremerton, the ones they were proposing, the city owned every one of those assets, and so they do a master lease agreement that covers the whole city.
It's a franchise agreement.
And then they have a separate addendum for every single pole. So it's at the sole expense of Verizon to install these things and maintain them, and then they're leasing back those poles. They've thrown out some rough numbers of about $2,000 a year per pole. They're looking at doing 96 poles in Bremerton. So it's could be a win-win potential. So I think it's something we might just want to
Well, I agree, but I don't know that we can single out one provider and provide that's the other.
Okay,
So
so it has
what's-
nothing to do, so you're exactly right, they talked about that last night. I mean, Verizon's the largest right now, so there's more users using Verizon.
Right,
I think
yeah.
that's why they're out ahead of this.
Mhm.
But, there is no conflict. You could actually share telephone pole. I mean, there's some logistics why you wouldn't want to do it. They're basically, let's say T-Mobile came in behind it, want to do the same thing, then they may take every other pole. You know what I mean? So it doesn't preclude anybody else from being involved. There's 4 major users right now, but Verizon, they're the largest out
yeah.
there. I don't know, I think it was very, very interesting. I could see some potential win-wins, and why not get some more information? Let's get that same presentation to us and look at it, because
They
huge
approached,
community benefit.
Verizon approached Transit, they wanted to hang one on, down to ferry terminal on our transit deck up there, they wanted to hang one up there.
Is it a small cell or a large
Yeah,
one?
no, it's a small cell, and then they wanted to put one on our bike barn up on Bainbridge Island at the ferry terminal. So they're aggressively out looking for places to hang and stuff.
Well, and the company that approached us was somebody who wants to tie up all the franchise rights to it.
Yeah,
And then,
and that's another issue.
and we just said,
I agree with that.
and then they were going to sell those rights
Yeah.
to
We
Verizon,
stay in
T-Mobile.
control of this deal.
Yeah.
We're the.
Okay. See, I hadn't heard it from a vendor yet.
Yeah.
The only folks that have approached us are
Correct.
wanting
That's
to
why I was like, ooh.
tie
now
up,
this
tie
makes
up
sense.
the market area.
Yeah.
And that's what Transit heard, was somebody that was looking
third
for
party.
spaces for Verizon, and wanted to set up an agreement with us.
So
I'll
again, in all your
contact
spare
Bremerton.
time, I'm not saying it's do it
Yeah.
tomorrow, but it was an
It's a
intriguing.
good idea.
It was a really intriguing presentation.
Okay.
And I had one other item, if I
And I
may.
got another item as well.
Okay, I had a meeting with the Sinclair Ridge project in Bremerton, and we had talked about seeking mitigation from McCormick Woods Park as part of that project, which is on Campus Parkway. They actually, it sounds like, have not quite met the Bremerton standards for park facilities, and they're trying to figure out how to meet those standards. And so they're actually really interested in the idea of providing something to McCormick Woods, although it could be directly constructing something on the Campus Parkway side as far as access or a contribution, but we may hear back from them of a proposal for that.
Good.
And so, so I'm optimistic that that may go forward, although I think they have bigger challenges in working out their differences with the new owners of McCormick concerning the development of those roads, because they need land for stormwater. There's a whole lot of other issues that the two developers are going to have to get together on, and whether they see eye to eye or not, I'm not sure that'll happen. But anyway, I had a good meeting with Bremerton.
So the other item I wanted to mention is, have you been following the comp plan with the county and what they're proposing along Mile Hill? I understand they're looking at potentially changing some of the earlier proposals for.
I have not seen anything revised from the county, so
Okay.
if that's something I need to look at, I will.
You might want to get a hold of Dave Greetham and just find out what the latest proposals along Mile Hill include. I know at one point they were talking about taking it from commercial to an industrial designation, which I don't know if that's good or bad.
Downzoning it to housing, though, when it's already redeveloped,
Right.
is a different challenge.
Right.
Yeah.
If it stays in the UGA.
Their deadline's June 30 as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Carrie, would you mind following up on that?
Yes.
Just because I've been out sick for a few days and I'm trying to get caught up.
by 10.
Yep.
Okay,
Thank you all.
thank you.
You believed we had a meeting last night for that long, didn't you?
No.
You texted him last night.
But that was-
6:15, I said, are you coming to the executive session tonight? I was making dinner.
Bremerton goes.
What executive session?
There's so the